You're listening to A Little Too Quiet. It's the Ferndale Library podcast, and it's brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. Today we have best-selling author Lucy Clarke, author of 7 destination thrillers, including the very latest release, The Hike, and also a really good book called One of the Girls, which we here at this library actually featured for a discussion for one of our book clubs, and we had a really good time talking about that book. Lucy Clarke is the author of several destination thrillers like The Castaways or other popular releases like The Blue and No Escape, both of which have been filmed as a major international TV series for Paramount Plus, which is due to be released sometime in the near future. And during our conversation today, we're going to be talking to Lucy about the actual research that she does for these books. She actually goes on a lot of the trips and then writes about them. One of the Girls was about 6 friends who go away to Greece, and there is a murder, and the book is captivatingly conceived because you, like a good mystery, you learn about the murder on page 1, and then you have to spend the duration of the book figuring out who exactly did it or what exactly happened. But that's a story about 6 friends, and it's an all-female cast, and these are women at unique points of their life with unique careers and unique family situations. And the great thing about Lucy Clarke books is that you bring all these characters into one location and they all are kind of bringing the exterior stresses of their life, and those are all kind of thrown into sharp relief in the midst of, solving a murder or all this subterfuge and intrigue. Lucy Clarke has become known for these female-forward thrillers set in exotic locales, and The Hike, which is the newest one, is a suspenseful thriller about 4 women who gather their hiking gear and set out for an adventure together out on the Norwegian wilderness, but not all of them complete the trip. With no cell phone coverage and no sign of help, Liz, the protagonist, and her 3 best friends decide upon this wilderness in Norway as an ideal camping ground for what they usually have as their annual vacation together, because it's going to be amazing, right? You get to see these stunning mountains of Norway, and you can kind of get away from it all. Liz is burned out from both her marriage and work, and she just needs an escape, and she thinks 4 nights out there enjoying adventure together with her best friends and getting complete, hopeful rest and relaxation is going to be exactly what she needs. And following a trail through these lush valleys and towering peaks and passing jewel blue lakes, it becomes clear, though, they aren't the only ones on the trail, and they're far from civilization, and no one can hear them scream. And you know what? It does kind of get into kind of a horror territory here, which is interesting. We'll be talking about that with Lucy Clarke today. And we also talk about the structure of the novel, which is actually told in alternating perspectives, which only adds to the suspense and the page turnability. Clarke was inspired to write this book, The Hike, after spending 5 days trekking through the wild, rugged beauty of Norway with a tent on her back. So we're going to be talking to her all about that. Here is our chat with Lucy Clarke.
Hi.
Hi, Lucy. How are you?
Good. Yeah, very well.
Thank you. Thank you for the chance to chat today.
Yeah, lovely to be here.
Congrats on the latest book.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great. It's coming out. Excuse me. Yeah, really happy to have it coming out in the US so soon. So yeah, it'll be exciting.
Wonderful. Can you start off by telling our listeners about what inspired this book, or maybe some of the actual physical research that goes into a book like this?
Yeah, of course. So The Hike is set on a trail in Norway, and I always start my novels with place. So that's kind of the thing that comes first rather than a plot hook. It's place. It's what world do I want to inhabit and where am I sort of passionate about? So I knew I wanted to do a book about hiking, or have that as a mechanic that sort of leads the structure through the story. And I really wanted to travel to Norway because it's just such true remote wilderness.
Sure.
And it has some of the best hiking trails in the world. So I decided to set it there and then went off on a research trip with my backpack and my hiking boots and tent and stove and things, and was joined by my husband. and we went hiking for we did a sort of 5 day night trail, just a made up one, the two of us, and yeah, we didn't see another hiker for the entire time. It was absolutely crazy. It really felt so remote, and it very much brought the landscape to life, those kind of emotions to life that you might have when you are, yeah, out in the wilderness. And so it really helped me then kind of inform my characters and just kind of what I wanted to then make the novel about, really.
Sure, sure. Maybe the word maybe the word eerie is appropriate too when it is that remote, right? Is that there's just a kind of something a little scary is not the right word, but you know, we're so used to the hustle and the bustle and the noise and the city and what have you, and cars and people everywhere. It's kind of weird on our modern minds to get out there, or at least speaking from my personal experience. But you
No,
capture that.
I completely agree. It definitely felt eerie to see the mobile phone coverage just kind of disappearing bar by bar
Right.
as we walked. And you know, you go through all those things of like, well, what if something happens? What would I do? Yeah, it was eerie. That's exactly the right word.
Right. And I have to presume as a writer, your brain is constantly doing that, like, what? But what if? And did you have those thoughts obviously occur while you were out there on the trail?
Absolutely. I did all the time about very small things.
Oh man.
In Norway, they have these DNT cabins, they're called, that are very small, sort of beautiful wooden buildings in the middle of nowhere, very
Mm-hmm.
remote places.
Mm-hmm.
And they are, it's a government run operation, and they're left unlocked for hikers or in snowy season for kind of snowshoers or whoever to come by and have a place of refuge. And we planned to kind of hike to some of these DNT cabins that we'd seen on a map, you know, like a kind of a hiking map. And we just felt like, you know, you're walking in the middle of nowhere in a mountain plateau thinking, is there really going to be a cabin out here? You know, is this true? So we bought our own tent just in case we got kind of caught out. Then when you get, you know, we found our first cabin one evening just as the light was starting to fade, and you're kind of on the threshold thinking, but what if it's locked?
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of push the door and think, okay, amazing, it's open. And then the next thought is like, who's going to be inside? We're in the middle of nowhere. And once you get in, you know, we found the cabins empty, but in, I think, height of summer, you might find them with other people in.
Sure.
But then, you know, once night falls and you've lit the fire and you're kind of getting in your sleeping bag, you then start thinking, who's going to turn up? So there was a lot of what if moments and questions. And I think all of that was really fun for exploring in the novel.
I want to get into kind of the lingo about books and how they're marketed sometimes. Thriller is usually thrown around, but when I was, and this is my own, I'm bringing my own baggage, I guess, to this, but when I was reading this, and I think there's a fine line, maybe there isn't, but I was thinking there was a little bit of aspects of horror to this book. I think that you can open up the flap and there's no spoiler that these four friends are going to go on the trail and they may or may not exactly be alone on the trail. Ellipsis. I'm not going to say any more, but I wanted to talk about how the early stages of the book, before the plot really gets going, there's like, you write really beautifully about that eeriness, and you know, there is like this subgenre of atmospheric horror, and the mountain kind of being a character, or the mountains, and kind of being this presence. I really think you tapped into that, and it was kind of spine tingly. So I don't know, thriller horror.
I'm very pleased. Thank you, because you know, it's one of those things, you're pulling on different strands of tension, and I think more often in my novels they don't veer into horror.
Right.
You know, they're quite character driven.
Right.
But I absolutely know what you mean with the hike, because I sort of explored perhaps something, the hint of, the whisper of something supernatural potentially on the mountain. And I think that was really fun to play with what's real and what's not, and what is myth, and how that made the women feel when they were out there, because it's all very well hearing a story about the mountains and mythology when you're kind of cozied up in a lodge having a beer, but when you're suddenly out there alone on a trail in the middle of nowhere, those kind of stories feel very different, as we know from being kids, right? Like
Right.
when you tell the stories in your tent with a torch under your chin, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
But the same story, in daylight is different. And I love playing with that kind of tension. It's a fun part when you're creating a sense of atmosphere to think quite analytically, what are my strands of tension, and looking to the mountain, looking to the women and their relationships, and how they interact. And also, of course, the external characters that kind of potentially join them on the mountain. So lots of different strands of tension to play with and build, and hopefully keep the reader guessing as to what is going to be the true threat for them.
Exactly. Liz, Maggie, Helena, and Joni are our characters here. So I just wanted to go off on another tangent. I'm podcasting from inside a public library, and we host book clubs. And we very, very recently had one of the girls as our featured book club. And it was such a good discussion. And primarily, everyone wanted to talk about the characters. And I just wanted you to share about character development and always, bringing such a diverse cast together. They all have unique backgrounds. They have unique situations. They all have unique baggage. They all have friendship, and that's all in there. And you do such a good job. And you're doing it again here with these 4 in the hike. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I'm really pleased you chose one of the girls as a book club read. That's wonderful to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think with character development, it's definitely a skill that I have struggled with in my kind of, when I was fresh to this career. I found it really hard. It was kind of the area of writing that would take me the longest to really feel like, okay, now I know my character. Whereas I think as I've got a bit more experience, perhaps it's because I have more lived experience, I don't know, but I feel more able to create characters a little to find their voices a little bit more speedily.
Sure.
And I think with a cast like I have in One of the Girls and in The Hike, when they're quite big groups of people, so I've got 4 protagonists in The Hike, all women, all similar ages, all went to school together. So you could think they're kind of a fairly similar group, but I think what I'm very aware of when I'm setting out my characters is to have those points of contrast and difference about them, so that I don't want to fall into archetypes. And I think, making your women as complex and flawed as possible is really important, because, I might identify with Liz in the novel is particularly, she's the one that plans the hike. She has a checklist. She's kind of like quite straight-laced and a doer. And, there's certainly aspects of myself that I see in Liz, but also there's aspects of myself that I see in Joni, who is wild and impulsive, and a rock star is her actual job. And, there's like not those aspects of me are in her, but there's other sort of vulnerabilities. And I think you can always take parts of yourself and kind of magnify them or explore. If you push this part of you, this tiny part of your personality to the limit, where would you go? And I think that's really helpful in character development, because it feels authentic and real.
I wonder whether this is fascinating to you. And again, I'm coming at this from being a horror fan, but we think of the trope of the final girl, and one of the most compelling aspects is in whatever supernatural horror thing that the final girl is surviving against. One of the most fascinating things is just how that character that you've gotten to know, and you get to know characters, is responding to the calamity or the threat or the lingering shadow or the creeping shadow. It's not so much the scare, I think, that you're going for. I think that one of the victories of your book, and even One of the Girls too, is if all these things are happening to these people and we've gotten to know their situations in life, it is now captivating just to see how they respond. And then you empathize with them too, because you're seeing what it's doing to them. I think that's what's going on here, for me anyway.
Yeah. I love that. That's really interesting. And actually, I have to say, I don't know anything about the horror genre, so it's kind of interesting hearing.
We could have a whole other podcast, Lucy.
Yeah, I need to listen in.
Yeah.
But I think, that how you respond is, I love taking, say, the 4 different women that I've got in this book, putting them in the same situation, and there'll be 4 different responses to the exact same situation. And I think that is really interesting. And you can do it with very small things like their response to the way they wear, for example, just to kind of show contrast in character, how they wear their backpack and how they walk with it. So before I even started out the writing, I decided how each of my women would walk. Who like holds straps and is hunched beneath it, who's kind of striding out, who just the different ways that we all walk. And when I pause to look around me and just see people walking down the street, just their walks tell you so much about their mood in that moment or their personality. And I think that it's just looking at the same situation, but from 4 different, points of view is always really, really interesting if you like interested in human psychology. So that was fun to play with.
And that comes about in the book club too, where you're like, well, in the first part of the book, I thought I was sympathizing with this character, but then I really started to sympathize with this character. Then I started identifying with that character. And then you just kind of, you get to know all of them. Can you just talk briefly before we let you go, just about like destinations? I think that there's something inherently like a little, a little bit scary about travel in general, because you just don't know what's going to happen. Your books are like these extreme fantastical things. No one wants those things to happen.
Yeah.
But you travel a lot, and travel is an adventure, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I do travel a lot. All of my novels are set in sort of quite far-flung places, whether that's the Philippines or Bali or Australia. And I like setting my books in these kind of places because firstly, I love to travel and I love going on the research trips for the books, like absolutely the best part of the job. But also because on a character level, I love taking people out of their ordinary lives and putting them into a foreign place, somewhere that they might feel displaced or certainly just out of their routine and out of, you maybe lose inhibitions, you might discover things about yourself that you didn't know because you've not been in this situation before. You're opened up to new stimulus. It's just quite an interesting place to take characters from one world and put them somewhere else and see really if they flourish or if they flounder. And that's why I choose to set my novels in different destinations.
That's what we enjoy about these books. We are along for the ride, but we're getting to know people as we go. So Lucy Clarke, thanks again for joining us on this podcast, and congrats again on the hike.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Take care.
Bye.
And that was our chat with best-selling author Lucy Clarke. Her newest is The Hike. Previously had books like The Blue and One of the Girls. More information in our show notes about more of her destination thrillers. And thank you so much for listening to another episode of A Little Too Quiet. It's the Ferndale Library podcast, and it's brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. My name is Jeff Milo, and the music you hear at the beginning and end of each episode is by local musician John Duffy. If you want to support this podcast, you can go to ferndalefriends.org. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe, and leave us a positive review. It would help us find more listeners. We'll be back next week with more. Thanks for listening.